Hi, I'm Jerry Coltonbeck.
And I'm Dalen Zartman with Rescue Methods. Jerry and I are going to talk to you about pick-off rescues today. We're going to hit the basic fundamentals and considerations. There's a lot of different ways to do pick-offs. We've got a lot of videos on pick-offs on our website, so go to www.rescuemethods.com to see the complete lineup or a more comprehensive look at all the variables that go into pick-offs. With hitting the basics today, make sure you've read the article and understand the basic considerations that we're dealing with here in this ground school application. Jerry, tactically, we got to kind of develop an approach when we first get on scene and start analyzing these pick-offs. The first thing we want to look at is the victim. For you, what's the first thing you're looking at as you run up on scene and see this mid-level victim?
I want to assess his capabilities and his capacity as to whether or not he can help me. You know, is he incapacitated and we need to do a full mid-height package, or if he's just hung up in his gear somehow, and once we access him, he can help us, free himself from his gear, and then be able to perform the rescue that way.
Okay, so that's the primary first starting point. What's the victim's problem? How injured is the victim, and how much help or assistance can the victim give us or provide us as we're trying to do these packaging applications? The second big thing to consider is the platform. Is the victim on loaded lines or a loaded system of some type, or has he simply fallen over the edge and he's trapped on an edge? Is he in a platform that's loaded but he's not loaded? For example, FDNY's recent rescue at their high-rise structure. You got window washers, they're in scaffolding, they're in harnesses, but their harnesses and systems themselves aren't necessarily loaded. It's the platform that they're working on that's loaded. So huge difference for us as far as rigging and how easy or complex the pick-off is whether or not we're transferring the load of the victim onto another system. If they're not loaded on something and they're just on a static platform, it makes the process much easier and much quicker. Once we've moved past victim condition, victim problem, and then platform, we also need to identify what's in place and whether it's a usable resource for us. So a lot of times on the industry side of things, the gear they're using, the winches, the cables, whatever, or even recreationally, their software and hardware may not be systems that we're comfortable accessing as far as part of the rescue sequence. So you gotta make some quick decisions about whether you're gonna re-rig or use existing rig. Some of the last considerations as we start assembling our gear and figuring out our approach sequence for this is figuring out whether we're going to come directly down, so top side accessing victim, bring them straight down to the bottom, whether we need to have a more versatile system that's going to bring them back up, which we always want to have those versatilities, but tactically understand where your end objective is and have that goal or benchmark established before you start the sequence. With that whole up-down theory is moving brake versus fixed brake. There's a lot of debate, at least in our area, about which one is more advantageous. And Jerry, just hit real quick what you think the primary differences are between a moving brake approach and a fixed brake approach for pickoffs.
Well, obviously the biggest difference, if you're going to do a fixed brake, you're going to have the descent control device topside, and they're going to be lowering you down, until you reach the victim. Moving brake is where you have the descent control device on you, and you're able to control your descent that way. Like you said, there's a lot of debate. Personally, I like the moving brake because I can control my descent, the rate of speed, and where I stop in relationship to the victim a lot easier without having that line of communication for me to topside and tell them when I need to stop.
Yeah, and on pickoffs, that stop point is a pretty sensitive subject. We're going to discuss it briefly here, but you want to have a lot of finite control over your body position in relationship to the victim. I think for us, we've come to a point where we'll advocate saying if you're a relatively inexperienced repeller, in theory, or if you've got a potentially combative victim that you're trying to access, or a highly agitated victim, being on a fixed brake eliminates one other thing that you've got to operate and control, gives you free access to both hands to be able to manage the situation. So I can understand the safety perspective from that angle of things. But in all reality, pickoffs are a level 2 rope rescue skill, so you shouldn't be a novel repeller. You shouldn't be novice on rope. It should be something that you're very comfortable and competent with. And we're pretty big advocates of the advantages that a moving brake bring you for pickoff application. So that kind of sums up our tactical sequence. We're going to do some ground school review of our rigging real quick. and just talk about how you want to pre-rig, what your basic options are, and how you're going to orient to one another as you approach with different sets of gear. We're going to hit these real quick, clean and neat, just to give you this quick overview, and again, to see the complete layout of all of these applications in the field performing pickoffs. Make sure you go to the website and check out the additional videos. So, from a pre-rigging perspective, Jerry would be the victim. Jerry's rigged onto a main and a belay. That's not always going to be the application, and pickoff rescues are one of the primary rescues that we'll say at times we may consider eliminating a two-line or a belay system. The only time that we'll really advocate making that decision is when you do have multiple lines laid out, especially if two rescuers are coming down. You're limited on resources for managing the belays. It's a calculated risk-benefit analysis you've got to make, and it shouldn't be the norm. It should kind of be the rarity, if you will. But this is one of those applications. So here, Gary's rigged fully, main line, belay line, and he's had some kind of a problem. He can't continue to descend. He can't do any type of ascent, whether he's moderately incapacitated or he's got a gear issue. In this configuration, his gear would be loaded. So I've actually got to come down and I've got to transfer his load from the system that he's on onto my system. The first consideration I want to make is some belay variants. The one we're going to primarily review today is just putting a midline knot in your belay, pulling about an arm's length of rope from tail to that midline knot, configuring the midline to your harness connection point, and having this tail pre-rigged off to your accessory loop so that when you get to the victim, the first connection that you're going to make is the tail of the belay. There's some simple knots in here. We've got to figure it on a bite on the end of the belay, and then we've got a midline butterfly. It's important to note that we believe in putting G-rated gear at this connection point with guys like us or our size, because this piece of hardware can potentially collect both loads if we have a critical failure of the main line. So this is going to rig into my harness, and we'll take a close look at this rigging here in a second. And this belay is going to trail off to my hip. Main line is going to come into the rigging point of my harness. My brake rack is rigged in, and I've got a pickoff strap. This pickoff strap has two different brackets on it. It's basically got what we call a U on one end and a V on the other end. The V is the adjustable end. When we pre-rig with these, we want to take the U. We're also advocates of saying use links on your, as opposed to carabiners, on your pickoff strap applications. When you pull anything that's not loaded off and try and rig it in and then manipulate the load, what happens a lot of times with those pieces of hardware, Jerry, that were once flaccid and now they're being loaded?
A lot of times you get a twist in them, or you can side load them to where on your rigging component of your harness, it'll catch that screw link on the side of the carabiner and prevent it from fully resting where it needs to be, and you can side load that carabiner, which could be catastrophic.
Yeah, so we really want to make sure we're avoiding those gate loads. So screw links give you a lot more versatility and forgiveness as far as the rigging hardware elements go on that pickoff strap. So the U and the V also translate to U being you and V being the victim. So you always make sure that the U comes into the eye of your rack. We'll take a close look at that here in a minute. It's imperative that all these rigging points that are going to transfer load go to the eye of the rack and not directly to your harness. If they go directly to your harness, then when you assume the load of the victim, Jerry, what am I putting the load on?
Well, you're putting the load on you, basically on your harness, so you have now a two-person load hanging off, suspended from you, which is what you don't want.
Yeah, it puts all that weight on your body itself. You want to make sure that you rig into the eye of your rack or your descent control device if it's got a sheave element on it, so that you're directly transferring the load through the main line to an extending rigging element that goes to the load of the victim. That keeps all that weight off of you. I also take the time to make sure that all these connection points I'm going to make are on the accessory loop or the side of my harness that's going to be based on my approach to the victim. So as I'm coming down that wall rappelling, or on a fixed brake, when I get to him, it's quick detachments and quick attachments. Remember, you want to have speed as a priority in these. Typically speaking, for mid-height packaging, this isn't kind of docile, gradual pace of collection of the victim, this is a pretty hairy situation where you want to move fast and get that victim loaded in. So my brake rack's rigged in. As far as my approach goes, when I get down to the victim, if I can get in close proximity to this victim, pick-off straps work very effectively, and I probably don't have to invert as long as I'm really close to him. If I'm a span away from him, so he's deployed from a point that I can't mimic, and I've got to kind of scale across the wall a little bit to access where he's at, when I get to him, it's imperative that I invert because I want to collect his lines and bring his body into position with me. If you just think about how many free hands you have once you've done your lock-off tie-off, trying to hold his ropes and secure him to me and do all these rigging connection points is going to be very difficult and fatiguing doing one-arm techniques. So when we invert, we're going to rotate up, we're going to lock our ankles around the front side of the rope, which frees up both hands and lets us quickly work on those attachment points. The second big advantage of having our hands where our feet are is the ability to play things out. So if I stay at this element and I'm doing a line transfer, you can imagine when I start to play out Jerry's brake bar rack and he starts to go down, I can theoretically get very quickly to where I'm not managing his gear anymore. Jerry, when you invert, you're basically doubling the length of management that you can gain with your hands. So when you're typically doing these, what's your favorite body position for approach?
I like to invert just for that reason. It gives you more extension. You can play out his system a lot better and free him from the tension on his system. Plus it also gives me two hands to work with. Like you said, if I'm trying to reach over you and try to manage both our lines together, I basically only have one hand to try to extend his system as far as I can. Whereas if I invert, I've got two hands free and I can do all that work with both hands and get full extension.
Okay, so that is our primary approach. Those are the basic variables. In these applications, we're all talking about going down. We're talking about taking his load. He's got a problem here and letting him descend by managing his brake rack or activating his brake rack, having the pick-off strap in place and tensioned, and having the belay in place prior to doing those. Because you're basically going to have to rig in an integrated hauling system. And there's a lot of different ones out there. The Aztecs are great. The CMC CSRs are great. Any type of small, mobile, and portable integrated mechanical advantage system with a progress capture device in it allows you to stop, extend that system out to the victim, make the connection, and then haul them up. As you haul them up, you're taking the load off of these two systems. So here's the challenging parts about these. Number one, you've got to attach that haul system to one of two places. You either got to attach it to the eye of your rack, just like a pickoff strap, which if you're looking at our body proximity now, there is no distance allowance between the two of us to accommodate hauling him up. So that's where that stopping above his body position comes into place. The second option is to take some form of an ascender or progress capture device, rig it on your main line just above your brake rack, and then perform that haul-up system. If you perform that hauling system in that application, remember that you're also going to have a system that has the ability to lower. So Jerry, when you're using those systems from a versatility perspective and everything else, which is your preferred connection point? Do you like trying to stop high and going to the eye of your rack? Do you like coming a little bit lower and trying to come up here onto your tension system here?
I like to stop a little bit higher. Go ahead and pre-rig or rig into what he has readily accessible to me. And that's another reason, I like to stop a little bit higher in the invert. It just gives me hands free, the ability to pull him up as I need to. So I like a little bit higher and be able to rig into his, what he has available right there on him at the immediate time.
Yeah. So those are the basic options for all your equipment components for pickoffs. Again, there are a lot of ways to tackle these, but this is kind of the nuts and bolts or the meat and potatoes of pickoffs. Okay, so we're going to take a closer look step by step at the progression of attachments as well as what these hardware configurations look like. So we're going to start with that belay connection. We like to tie belays in, we like to use links, we like to use other applications, but remember with a pickoff, you may be traveling and working at speed. It may be imperative that you're making some quick connections and some quick variables. So carabiners may be an option that you elect. just do a good risk benefit and make sure that if you are using them, that you're watching the connection points and making sure that you're not side loading or gate loading any of your carabiners. So, connection number 1, belay. As we pan in here on my harness, you can see that I've got a piece of G-rated hardware right here, rigged into my harness with a midline knot. Got about an arm's length worth of tail, going to a figure 8 on a bite, and I'm going to make that connection first to my victim. The second attachment point to make is the pick-off strap. We want to make sure that we lay this out clean, straight, and neat. Don't have any twists in it, whether you're inverted or upright. Once you've got it laid out clean, straight, and neat, go ahead and make your connection. Again, we prefer links in these applications, but carabiners may be the fastest solution. Now, there are some guys that will omit the pick-off strap in lieu of their integrated hauling system. We like the redundancy of a pick-off strap. If you're going to eliminate this, we understand it because you still have 2 points of connection, but the pick-off strap is just a good redundancy until you've ensured that your cam or your progress capture device on that haul system isn't going to play out or create any problems for you. You also need to make sure that when you do go to deploy your system, if you're not going to play down and you're going to haul up, if you look at how we're configured here, obviously I can't make a connection here to my rack. We don't have any height differential to accommodate a haul. So what I would have to do is take this haul system and rig this up high on my main line with a progress capture device. This is where the assistance of a partner helps out a lot, because if he can, I can have Jerry grab the end of this CSR, I can go ahead and pull the play out, and Jerry can extend that down to his harness and make the appropriate connection. So know what his capabilities are and know which gear is going to work best for that application. If I was higher than him, then I could again take this CSR and go ahead and rig it into the eye of my rack directly to the rigging point on his harness. Just remember that depends on body position. If we're not going to haul, then we're going to play down. Jerry's brake rack is in place. If it's operable and I can go ahead and allow him to descend before I make any of these connections, I've got a good lock-off, tie-off on my rack, and then I'm going to access his brake rack once I have tensioned up this pick-off strap. So the pick-off strap is fully tensioned as much as I can get it. I evaluate my connection here going to the eye of my rack, make sure my link is locked well, make sure that he's not gate loaded on anything, and then I start deploying his rack. The other option is if he's functional, especially if it's a piece of industrial gear that you're not real familiar with, what's an option there, Jerry?
Have him operate his own gear. If he's able to help you and it's something you're not familiar with, once you have your attachments in place, just ask him to go ahead and extend his out, transferring his load onto your system.
So that's the end objective. We're trying to get load from point A to point B. Once these systems are loaded, then we can completely take away his 2 systems, clean up the ropes, clean up what we're deploying on, and get rid of these 2 in the equation. Body position is really important. So as I bring Jerry into position, Jerry, what's the one thing I don't want to let you grab onto?
I don't want you to grab a hold of my legs.
So especially when we're working on a wall, if I'm trying to walk the wall and keep Jerry in position, he's going to end up in between my legs, slightly below me. If he drapes his arms up around my shins, what's your first inclination?
You're going to pull down, which is your feet are going to slide off the wall and you're going to plant right against the wall.
Yeah, we don't want to ride the wall. I'll tell you where that's really particularly important is when you're doing a window transfer pickoff or a direct load pickoff where you're not transferring lines. You've got a static platform load, you're trying to bring someone out of an objective, get them on a wall and then bring them down. If you don't have both feet and both hands on that wall to scale, you have a lot of likelihood of smashing both entities into the wall, and it can be injury prone.
Right.
So this covers the basics. Jerry, anything you want to add to what we've got developed here?
No, I think the key point that you need to understand here too, and we've already discussed it, is assessing your victim and knowing at what height you need to stop at to be able to transfer his load. If he can help you, it's not that big of a deal. If he's got a gear issue or something like that, you may want to stop a little bit higher just to be able to transfer his load or to pull his load up and get the weight off of his gear.
So this covers the basic concepts. Again, make sure you check out the full series of videos to see all the variables on pickoffs and how to progress from point A to point Z. Make sure you keep reading Fire Rescue 1. Train hard.
So in the window pickoff application, as Sarah the rescuer approaches the victim, she's going to descend down, making sure she's communicating with the edge tender and the top side so that her feet end up slightly below her desired stopping point. Number one, that's going to put her in a position that she can get inside of that window or inside of that objective, but not go so far down that when she goes to leave that objective, her system will be loose and she'll be incapable of tensioning that system without simply sliding off and shock loading the system. So she's going to come down until she calls a loud stop, ensuring she's got a slight bend in her knees, just like that. Now Sarah's in a position to get inside of that window. At this point, she would either configure a hasty harness or a 6-knot harness or some other approved hasty implement onto the victim, or she would put a manufactured harness onto the victim. Once that harness is integrated in, her first connection point is the belay. So she's going to make a belay attachment to the victim's harness with the tail of that belay already pre-configured. She's then going to play out her pickoff strap, ensuring that it's straight, clean, and neat. And she's going to make the attachment of the pickoff strap or the V bracket on the pickoff strap to the victim's harness. As soon as she gets those two implements in place, she will straddle that opening so that the victim's going to come up either between her legs or off to one side. The preferred methodology is to have the victim between the legs. As she cinches up that pickoff strap, once she's got the victim secured on belay and pickoff, she's going to counsel or coach the victim up into the window opening or off of that midpoint landing. As soon as the victim's in a good position to ease out of the window, she's going to tension that victim and ease them out of the window by continuing to take up tension on the pickoff strap. It's imperative that she keeps one hand on the wall surface and that she's in a good body position to get both legs onto the wall surface. It's also imperative that you counsel or coach the victim and let them know that they cannot wrap their arms around your legs. If the victim wraps her arms around your legs, they can pull your feet off of the wall surface, causing you to lose protective positioning as a rescuer. Now Sarah gets her feet up on the wall surface, gets back out into her natural descent line, and she is now going to recommunicate with her topside guys, belay and main, and let them know that she's ready to lower.
Lower slow.
Lower slow.
Okay, so we can see here that Scott has stopped with his feet at about the height of the victim's waist. As soon as he's a little bit higher than the victim, feet at the victim's waist, he's going to go ahead and do a lock-off tie-off on his brake rack. Once his lock-off tie-off is completed and cinched down and he gives it a little tension test to make sure that it's not going to slip out, he's going to go ahead and traverse across the wall and get married up with the victim's lines. As soon as he gets that victim's line, we can see, looking at this application, that if Scott tried to hold on to those lines with just his arm or hand, he would very quickly become overly fatigued and be incapable of completing all the pickoff components. So Scott's immediately going to grab those ropes, he's going to get inverted, and he's going to utilize his legs wrapping around the front side of those lines to marry up with her rope system. Now he can freely let his right hand off of his brake rack, let his left hand off of her ropes, and utilize both hands to quickly make the right connection points. Scott's going to start with the end of the belay. So he's going to take that pre-configured tip of the belay, go ahead and tie it into the victim's rigging component on their harness. He is then going to disconnect the victim's belay if they have one. As soon as he disconnects the victim's belay, it is now out of the equation and the victim is now on, in a slack aspect, the primary or rescuer's belay. His next connection point is going to be the pickoff strap. He's going to disconnect his pickoff strap, let it hang so it gets clean, straight, and neat. Then he's going to take the V component or V bracket on the pickoff strap and connect that to the victim's harness. As soon as that component is connected, he's going to pull out all of the slack in the pickoff strap. He can utilize both hands to pull that victim as close to his rack component as possible. As he tensions that system up, he's going to give one quick check on his hardware to ensure that nothing is gate loaded and that everything is locked. Once he has ensured that he's safely captured the victim's load, he's now going to access the victim's brake rack, or descent control device. Whatever that device is, he's going to go ahead and activate their friction control, and he is going to allow the victim, using good control techniques on the brake bar rack with his hands, to manipulate that piece of hardware or that piece of descent control device as he lowers the victim, thus transferring their load from their main line onto the pickoff strap. So he can take his right hand, he can put his right hand down on the lower bars and spread those bars out as needed, or take out one of the bottom bars to give freer movement of that main line. Once that load is starting to transfer, he can then get right side up and fully play out the rest of that descent control device and remove it from the equation. As soon as the victim is completely unrigged from all of their hardware elements, he is then going to get back on his own brake bar rack, undo his lock-off tie-off, and descend down to ground with his victim.